So we're talking about the collaboration between public and private capital. We just heard a little bit about that, guided by science-based frameworks. And we're going to ask our panelists at breakneck speed to examine the global investment landscape to 2030, the role of financing institutions, and how to better direct capital toward real economy decarbonisation. Okay, so Andrew, let me start with you. You've been in this business for some time. We've all been in our businesses for some time. Let's just put those cards on the table. How do you think the green finance story has evolved over the years, and where does it stand right now?
Well, first, Lucy, great to be here. Thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating. That first panel was really great. And yes, I'm on the side of the beavers, just to be clear. Yeah, I'm old enough to have been at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, when this whole thing started, if you like. And that's when I watched heads of state walk down a red carpet and sign the Framework Convention on Climate Change and sign the Biodiversity Convention. And that's when we set up some of the early institutions to address climate change and nature, for example, the Global Environment Facility. In those days, the view really was that this is a government responsibility, much more than a private sector responsibility. And we obsessed about something called incremental cost. Because in those days, it was much more expensive to do things low carbon than to do things the old-fashioned way. And so we did huge amount. I was then running the Environment Department of the World Bank. We and many others did a lot of very sophisticated analysis of where is that incremental cost and how do we inject the money, public money, so that governments could do what they need to do and a little bit of private sector. Well, fast forward to today, 33 years later, we're in a very different world. The amounts of money are much, much larger. The urgency is much, much greater. And the role of the private sector is now absolutely and utterly central. And there's much less public money than we thought, quite frankly. So the name of the game now, obviously, is use that public money, and it's going to be great hearing from Chris, because he's in that market very directly. Use that public money and the philanthropic money to inject it carefully so that the private sector does the right thing. There's no shortage of money in the world. It's a little bit like Sander was just saying, there's no shortage of water in the world. There's plenty of water. The problem is the water's in the wrong place and the water is dirty. It's rather similar on money. You know, you'll see different numbers, but if you look at all of the financial assets in the world, it's between 250 trillion and 500 trillion. And then you'll see numbers where we need 7 trillion or 8 trillion to do the green thing, so to speak. There's no shortage of money whatsoever. The problem is we're doing things the old-fashioned way. And the question is, why is the private sector not investing more? It's not because these investments don't make sense. Incremental cost now has declined to negative in many places. Renewable energy in 80% of the world's surface is cheaper than doing it in coal or gas. So the question is, why not? And part of it is inertia. Part of it is we've always done it this way. I did a PhD in finance a long time ago, and if somebody had said to me, the job of the financial sector is to address climate change, I would have said, you're nuts. The job of the financial sector is to be neutral. We follow return, and we assess risk, and we allocate money. But the truth of the matter is the financial sector is not neutral. The financial sector likes to do things that are comfortable because they've always done it, and it's cheaper for them to do it that way. And so it's also a very relational sector. And so financial institutions, especially the banks, for example, they've had clients for years and years that might be oil companies. They know how to do business with them. Dealing with a new company, it's more risky. So the job of the public sector and the philanthropic sector is to nudge, to de-risk, to make it more attractive so that those funds would flow in the right place. And we are now fighting a battle because, as you know, there's been a real backlash against the amazing, amazing commitments that were made in Glasgow. Do you remember in the Glasgow COP, the entire financial sector almost, $140 trillion of assets under management committed to net zero. And now they're less committed. Many of them will say they're still committed, and some really are, but they're not talking about it anymore, partly because they realize, one, it's much more difficult than they thought, and two, there's a big political backlash. We shouldn't get too discouraged about that. We should recognize that progress is rarely linear. It goes up and down. Political fashions come into play. The election in the United States changed a lot of things, but it did not change the laws of physics, and it did not change the laws of economics. And we need to stay strong to those two things.
Thank you so much. Just as a matter of interest, when did you change your thinking about the role of finance from that it needs to be completely neutral? If it wasn't at the Rio Earth Summit, when did you change your thinking?
Well, I think these things come over time, and you realize that actually things back then, to be honest, it didn't make sense for commercial financial institutions back then to invest in renewable energy because you'd make a big loss. But as the price has come down so dramatically, you know, in 1979, President Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the roof of the White House. Since then, those solar panels cost 99.7% cheaper than they did then. It's been a total revolution. Same with battery storage. Makes sense today. Tomorrow at lunchtime, we're going to be launching a major initiative on battery storage. Battery storage now makes sense. The problem is there are distortions in the system. We need to remove them.
Okay, thank you. Chris, can I bring you in here? Could you tell us a little bit about the National Wealth Fund and what is its current mandate? And I didn't put the word current in, but that makes it sound like it could expand or contract.
I'm sure it will expand or contract. As Andrew so rightly said, these things are rarely linear, which I'll probably have on my tombstone, by the way. But, actually Andrew's introduction is the perfect introduction to what the Wealth Fund is about, because it was set up 4 years ago with a view to really addressing those situations where the private sector can't get there on its own. That may be because the technology is not fully understood. It may be because of some of those kind of implicitly neural pathways that you're describing mean that people just can't get there. Our job is to invest. We think of ourselves as an impact investor, to put government money into situations that will make a return, that will make the country money, but at the moment the private sector won't get there all on its own. And that's really trying to address the situation that Andrew describes, which obviously I fully agree with. And where our mandate really is, and we have to make a financial return. We don't make grants. We make loans. We invest right across the capital stack. And we are there really to help the country grow. And you know how much importance this government is putting on growth, but also to help very critically towards net zero. And I don't see those two things as contradictory. In fact, I think without one, you don't get the other in anything that passes for the medium or long term.
And what sort of time span is the return expected within? What's the sort of horizon?
Well, when you start a new financial institution, you have to think a bit long term, because you have to build the pipework, if you will, before you can start making loans or anything else. So we kind of think of ourselves as breaking even, kind of 2029, 2030. We have a return on capital requirement, but in reality that will become a real thing as opposed to something that looks good on a spreadsheet, kind of 2030 and beyond.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And the detail is really interesting as well. Andrew, we're obviously falling far short of where we need to be in terms of financing the green transition. Could you just give us some highlights, so best practice today, and where do you think are the biggest gaps?
So around the world, and certainly in this country, I mean, there is a lot of creativity. This is one very, very good example. Over the last 4 years, I've been running the Bezos Earth Fund, which is a $10 billion grant facility for climate and nature. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about $10 billion sounds like a lot of money, but it's actually a drop in the bucket compared to what is needed. So we've got to be very careful that we inject money in a way that gets leverage. In other words, if you simply, traditionally, philanthropy or government money, you put a pound in and you get a good pound of output out. You build a school or you build a power plant on your own. What we have to do is somehow inject the money so that that multiplies. And you can do that several ways. One thing you can do is, for example, you can work with governments to change policy. And that policy can then trigger a big response from the private sector. So we did a lot of that. Another thing you can do is inject money very carefully to de-risk. So I'll give you one example. You'll often hear around the world and even in this country, well, we'd love to invest in green investments, but there aren't any projects ready to finance. There isn't a good pipeline. There isn't sort of finance ready. And the reason for that is if you look at the total cost of a project, the most risky part is really the first 5%. It's basically doing the design work, doing the land procurement, doing the government discussion, getting permits, until you get to what's called financial closure. Once you've got to financial closure, the project is designed and you can get on and lay the concrete and so on. But the difficult part, it comes in the design and getting all of the stuff ready. Private sector, and often that first part, maybe half of everything that goes through that first part never reaches financial closure. So that first part is actually very hard to finance. And the private sector says, I'll stay away from that. I actually want to come in when there is a project prepared. And that's why you hear, I can't find any good projects, so I do what I've been doing for 100 years, sort of thing. So what we did together with some very clever financial people, we put together something called the Allied Climate Partnership. And a person called Mark Galogly sort of led that exercise. And essentially what that does, we put money in and we took first loss. And we said, tell you what, we will invest in this, and if you don't get through that first 2 years, that first 5%, we'll take the hit, that's fine. If you do get through, you're going to be selling it on to investors, we will share in a pari passu way the return. And then our money would sort of rotate, if you like. Providing that first loss was then able to draw in the next tier of financial money, which is often the sort of the guarantee agencies, and the IFC type organizations, and increasing the private sector. So that's an example of a sort of a clever trick, which actually is now becoming profitable, because even although maybe 40% of those first 2 years don't work out, nonetheless we make enough money and then it's able to be recycled again and again. That's one example. I could give 20 such examples. The problem is not that we don't have great examples, is that we're not thinking big enough about massively replicating those. And we are lacking leaders at the political level, corporate level, financial level, who will say, look, this is the time of my life as a leader. I am going to take risks. We are going to do something truly transformative.
Maybe we have some of those leaders in here today. Chris, can you also talk to me about appetite for risk that we're hearing about, but also how does the National Wealth Fund de-risk projects, essentially? How do you approach it?
Sure. So if you think about us in this ecosystem that Andrew has described, we're kind of the next stage on. So you move from, if you like, grant money into money where on its own the private sector won't necessarily get there. That's where we invest. That means we are taking a lot of risk. To put that in perspective for you, if you measure it in terms of the types of companies, types of situations that we invest in, it's about 4 times as much as, say, the EIB was taking when it came here. That, even more compared with the average bank, corporate bank. So we take a lot of risk where we try and make a return, and what we're really trying to do is get a multiple effect by getting more private sector money involved. And we have a target of kind of 3 to 1. £1 of our money, £3 of private sector, which is, sometimes we'll do a multiple of that, sometimes we won't. Give you an example. We've just set up a series of deals to help retrofit, create warm homes, which is a big target for obvious reasons. Obviously targets typically poorer people, but it's very efficient in terms of reduction of energy costs. So lots of benefit, and we've committed something like 1.3 billion, and we've done that in the form of partial guarantees to the private sector. We get their involvement, we help to build supply chains, that creates jobs, so it's really a nice thing. Overall, we have about 28 billion of finance to commit, and we've done of that about six and a half, call it, of commitments, and about half of that today is drawn.
Thank you so much. Again, I wish we had more time, but we do not. We must leave it there. But thank you so much for giving us so much insight, and a lot of people will act on this, I'm sure. Could we have a round of applause, please, for Chris Grigg and Sir Andrew Steer? Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.